I'm Alan Hardcastle with the Social and Economic Sciences Research Center at Washington State University. I'm going to provide just some introductory remarks, and then I'll very quickly introduce our panelists, and I'm going to ask each one of them to give a fuller introduction of themselves, and to provide some reflections on what they've already heard today in the earlier panels and plenary sessions, to get their impressions in general about how energy efficiency, which is our topic here, ties in to what they've heard earlier today. And we really do want to make this interactive, so I would like the audience to think about questions, write them down so you don't forget, and we'll try to create space during our 1 hour or 55 minutes now for that kind of dialogue, because I think what you're interested in is more important than what I have written down in terms of questions. But if I don't have questions from you, I'm going to go to my list. So there's your opportunity. So this is about energy efficiency. Why do we care? It hasn't really come up all that much in our conversations earlier today. We've heard about it in general. Why is energy efficiency so important? We all know why. It is an essential strategy for our state, for our region, for our planet, to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, number one, and to help meet future load growth. As much as we're doing to be more efficient, the numbers are clear that we will have increased demand for energy going forward. So it is a strategy to reduce things that we don't want and also to enable us to have the power that we've become accustomed to and that we need to carry on a modern society. When you look at the variety of energy efficiency specific initiatives in Washington State and across the nation, it's really quite spellbinding. If you look at all the funding sources, initiatives, programs, target populations, all the breadth that energy efficiency covers, it is really quite broad. And in every case, we know that these programs are receiving investments, whether federal, state, or local investments, with some goals in mind. One goal is, of course, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It's to create jobs. It's to reduce our dependency on energy of certain kinds, and also to create opportunities in our economy for new products and services that will serve our communities. You know, we heard it earlier today from Matt from Pennoir, the kind of the broad work that's being done with our partners in Canada. We heard from Tony, Susan, and Ann also about the kind of the broad network of policies, regulatory tools, and other initiatives that are going on. At the federal level, you heard at the EPA Clean Power Plan, which is kind of underway, is going to have a huge impact on how we think about our energy use and emissions. That is coming on top of existing rules and regulations across the nation that will have a huge impact on how we think about energy and power and emissions. At the same time, we know that looking at some kind of carbon pricing is bound to happen, whether that's a cap and trade, a fee and dividend approach, which is being proposed at the federal level, or even in our own state with I-732, the carbon tax. I certainly feel that's an inevitable and a very important part of our future to really get serious about taxing carbon and making sure that we pay attention to not just the negative impact, but also the opportunity that a carbon tax incents for us to do more with energy efficiency. At the regional level, if you look at our own Northwest Power and Conservation Council 7th Power Plan, you know that if you've read that document, it is very clear and upfront about the fact that energy efficiency is the primary strategy for achieving load growth for the next 20 years. It is the fastest, it is the cheapest, it is the cleanest, and it is the least risky of all the strategies we have available. We don't have to build new power plants, whether they're renewables or traditional. We avoid that cost. We avoid the cost of maintenance. We do so much if we just do a better job of being efficient with the energy we already have. And we know that in our state and in the region, there are many initiatives, policy and regulatory mechanisms we've put in place to make those happen. I-937, which is our renewable requirements, include energy efficiency in a big way, and we've made huge progress there. We know that our federal and state energy code, our state energy policies have had a huge impact on reducing the amount of emissions because we're expecting more from our building envelopes. We're doing more with renovation of existing buildings and weatherization. We know that at the local levels, you heard already today about Seattle 2030, the work that's being done on that front. You know, Washington has a lot to be very proud of. We've ranked a top 10 in the ACEE, which is the American Council for Energy Efficiency Economy, for the last 10 years. I think we're number 8 in this last year. We have done enormous, incredible work to leverage energy efficiency as a tool to help us reduce those emissions and meet power load growth over the future. And high-performance buildings. You heard about this earlier today. We're doing some incredible things to build structures that are more efficient, they're more innovative, and better able to help us achieve a renewable and sustainable future going forward. Remember, it wasn't that long ago when we had ARA, the Stimulus Act, where we pumped many millions of dollars directly into renewables and energy efficiency. And energy efficiency was a big player in that. Recall that that was a period after the recession when the construction industry was more or less falling flat. And the idea was if we can pump some money into alternative construction-related activities such as new weatherization, building renovation, thinking about those ideas, we have an opportunity to generate new jobs, to put some of those unemployed construction workers into a new vein that's still related to construction. So when that industry came back, they wouldn't have to come completely out of a field that they'd retrained for. They could move back into those construction building jobs as they move forward. It's also, I think, inevitable that we're going to see increasing federal and state investments. Department of Commerce just came out with another opportunity for energy efficiency and solar. These are all public buildings and institutions, but it's a good example of how our states continue to invest. And federal investments, I believe, will also continue, which is a very, very good thing. Our utility partners, our hats off to all of them that have worked very hard to leverage the energy efficiency opportunities they've had, improving plants and equipment. And we know also that we'll see continuing investment and a growing demand for energy efficiency projects and services going forward. So as we see an increase for demand and there's new projects and new technologies at the front, it creates enormous opportunities to bolster the economy as well as achieve those environmental goals that many of us care deeply about. There are some new frontiers for energy efficiency, I think, facing us for economic development, for new products and services, and new ways to think about energy efficiency to make it even a more successful strategy. Who would have thought that with the passage of marijuana in the state of Washington, there's a big uproar about what kind of lights should we be using for growing operations. We had to move to LEDs, right? So I'm waiting for the next company name to be Energized Star Cannabis. And if nobody's named that yet, I want to have a stake in that. So keep that. Did you know, for instance, that one marijuana plant consumes more energy than 7 refrigerators? Now, hopefully those are Energy Star refrigerators, but who would have thunk? So I guess the other feature to energy efficiency, which I've always found to be spellbinding and perplexing, is the fact that we can build lots of renewables to generate more power. But when you ask people to do less, use less power, you're asking them to change behaviors. Now, fortunately, we have lots of new control systems and technologies to make that automatic, so when you leave your house, everything shuts off. But ask me to stop driving my car, for many of us, is very hard to do. It's a convenience factor. It's something we've had from when we were young. It's a habit that we formed. It's very hard to change. So I think that that is a really big challenge for us going forward. Energy efficiency has got to be something we embrace and support, not just at the regulatory level and policy level. We as individuals have to be players in that new future. So I think that a corollary to that is, as we see new demand for energy efficiency and we see new opportunities for energy efficiency related products and services, it raises a big question about whether we're going to have people with the knowledge, skills, and abilities to support growth in that sector. Very important consideration. We have lots of programs at our colleges and universities that are around related to energy, but do we really have the capacity in our own institutions to create that workforce? And because technologies are changing so quickly, are we really well aligned with our institutional expectations for programs to make sure they meet the needs of our industry partners so that we can achieve the true potential of energy efficiency going forward? So we need to know that the programs that are in place or are being created are going to fill the gaps. And if we're to realize the full potential of energy efficiency as a strategy, we all know that it's a key strategy and we have to be part of that. And I think that for energy efficiency for the environment, to meet energy demand and to support the economy and jobs in our communities, we need to continue to pay and be very vigilant to the investments we make in energy efficiency, because they're not all good, they don't all pay off, and we need to think about ways we can improve our investments and support at the policy, regulatory, and investment levels. So with that, I will, by way of introduction, I'll turn to my panelists. To my left is Laurie Moen, who's a manager of the Solutions and Design Management of the Customer Energy Solutions Division for Seattle City Light. Next to her is Steve Gelb, the Seattle Director for Emerald Cities, Renew Energy Efficiency. And of course, Stan Price, Executive Director of Northwest Energy Efficiency Council. Welcome to all of you. I think I'd like to go ahead and start with you, Laurie, and just ask you to talk a little bit about what you do at Seattle City Light, and then any reflections you may have on what you heard earlier today.
Thank you, Alan, and thanks for inviting me here. John, in the last session, had you all put your arms on your shoulders and walk around your table. Spending 9 years in the K through 12, I'd have you stand up and do head, shoulders, knees, and toes to stay awake, but we'll forgo that one this afternoon. Everybody looks bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. You've obviously had a few of those brownies out there, right? So I have worked for Seattle City Light now for 4 years, and in January I took on a new hat in the capacity that Alan introduced me, Solutions Design and Management. I'll be working with all of our market sectors, residential, multifamily, commercial, industrial, solar, distributed generation, etc. Have teams of folks who will be designing the programs that we offer and services that we offer to all of our customer base in the city of Seattle. Or Seattle City Light, that is. You know, there's been a lot of topics brought forward today that to me paint a picture of a future that is really exciting and challenging. And ironically, I was just having a conversation yesterday about how the model of the public utility, or any utility for that matter, needs to change to meet our customers' needs. We have a business model issue, we have a financial model issue, and if we really start to address the energy efficiency, the distributed generation, the technologies, we do have buildings in our service territory right now where they are net zero. They are production level buildings, and what does that mean for our sustainability in the standard utility model? So you know, we've talked a lot about the efficiency and the skill sets, and you know, bringing the utility perspective from the energy efficiency group in the utility. We need to start not only looking at how are we going to continue to achieve our goals, but how are we going to change our business model to support that. And so those are just some thoughts from this morning.
Great, thank you. Steve.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Steve Gelb, and I work with Emerald City Seattle. We're a nonprofit, work on energy efficiency and equity in our cities, focusing on where we use most of our energy. We're part of a national network, and we're a collaborative of government, business, labor, and community groups. And we work primarily on policy and program development. One of the programs we're working on mostly today is called Renew, which is a program to help affordable housing owners through the entire process of energy efficiency. And it's a classic one-stop shop. If you're familiar with that term, we started working on this. This is an observation that we started working to see how we could align a lot of the programs that were out there in energy efficiency and in financing and in incentives and in technical expertise, and make sure owners give them the tools to move forward. And we found that the thing that was missing, the primary thing that was missing, was time and prioritization of energy efficiency. So that's where our Renew program comes from, to help them and in a way push them through the process. So a couple of observations on things this morning, and generally, I think you've heard that we have all the tools, technology, and really a lot of the trained workforce we need to make buildings net zero or highly energy efficient. What we need to be sure of is that we create an economic model for building owners that assures them a return on their investment, and that return needs to align with our climate goals and our utility goals in 937 and others, so that they don't fall short of those goals. They don't do some of the work and stop because it's no longer cost effective to them, or provides a reasonable return for them, but it goes deep enough so that when the building is done being upgraded or made more energy efficient, it's energy efficient enough so that if all the buildings did this, we would achieve our goals. But beyond that, and I think one of the errors we made very early in the energy efficiency world is thinking that a reasonable rate of return is enough. The rate of return building owners get on efficiency competes with the rate of return they get on everything else. Building owners are investors. They're investing in real estate, they're investing in their operations. And if they're going to spend money on energy efficiency, it needs to have a return that competes with buying a new building or remodeling their lobby or marketing their building. So I think we need to be open to using utilities, using government intervention, other things to make sure that, or to give the owners the incentive to prioritize energy efficiency, or else we're never going to see our potential. And in doing that, I think we want to create a steady stream of projects so that we can then align workforce development and workforce training with that. Because we've seen sort of peaks and valleys of energy efficiency work over the years. Alan mentioned ARA and so on. And then the other observation I'll make is in our program with Renew on affordable housing, we've noticed a distinct opportunity for operating buildings more efficiently. That buildings were built to a certain standard. Many of our standards in building code have minimum performance levels that are not necessarily designed for energy efficiency, but is designed for health and safety. So ventilation is an example of that. We have minimum ventilation levels to make sure that tenants of multifamily buildings are safe and comfortable. But we don't have a maximum level of ventilation. So we go into buildings where the engineers and those who design the buildings and who maintain the buildings make sure they meet that minimum standard, or double or triple that minimum standard. And suddenly we're sucking 2 or 3 times as much air out of the building as necessary. So that really uncovered this, I think, opportunity to have a much better defined workforce and guidelines around how to operate buildings efficiently. Not just keep them running, but keep them running efficiently. And I think that's a huge opportunity in this workspace also. And Stan knows a lot more about than I do about that, so I'm going to let him speak next.
Hi, I'm Stan Price. I'm the Executive Director of the Northwest Energy Efficiency Council. And first off, thank you for inviting me to participate here today. The Northwest Energy Efficiency Council is a nonprofit trade association that represents companies that provide efficiency products and services primarily in Washington and Oregon. So a number of companies that I'm sure you all are familiar with, McKinstry's, McDonnell Miller's, University Mechanicals, Trane, Schneider Electric. I named all my board members because that's
Very good.
I've learned that much as after 21 years of running a trade association. We do the kinds of things that trade associations do, which is to try to grow market opportunities for member businesses, which means we're trying to grow the market for energy efficiency so that there's more work and more jobs. for a lot of the reasons that Alan and others on the panel have already identified. I'll mention quickly two programs that we operate that I think have some direct bearing here. One is a long-time program that we've run, a training and credentialing program called Building Operator Certification. And it's focused on operations staff in mid-sized to large commercial and institutional buildings, and it's designed to increase the skill level of building operators as they run the energy-using equipment in buildings on a day-to-day basis. We started it here in the Northwest. We've been growing the credential actually across the United States and Canada, and it's probably the largest credential for an operations staff right now in the United States. About 12,000 people hold the credential across the U.S., and this is an area we may want to get into a little bit later in relationship to an opportunity area for workforce. For a lot of reasons that I'm sure we'll get into as well. The other project that I'll mention is the Smart Buildings Center, which is our newest project. It's actually physically located in the first floor of the Pacific Tower building, the old PacMed building, and depending upon what your vintage is in Seattle, it's the old haunted house up on Beacon Hill. And if you go way back, it's the old Merchant Marine Hospital that was built, I think, in the early 1930s. That building's gone through a substantial renovation. It's actually a sort of a prize of what we can do to take 20th century buildings and make them into 21st century performers. And we have about 5,000 square feet there dedicated to one of the newer areas, new focus areas in energy efficiency, which is the utilization of data in order to achieve operational excellence in buildings. It's our big data play, and we have room to grow there because we now have data sources that we certainly never had before in relationship to things that the utility is providing through automated meter infrastructure, smart meters, as well as data in building performance, building automation systems that allow us to analyze and visualize data in a way that provides for operational excellence. And tomorrow, I think some folks from my staff will be here showing you some fun toys that we have in our tool lending library, data loggers and power meters and so forth, which we make available for free to anybody in Washington State who wants to grab data on an energy-using system in their building and figure out a way to run it better. My one observation from earlier today will be as early as Alan's comments earlier, which were really good and spot on. He mentioned that energy efficiency has been driven primarily because it's a low-cost utility resource, and that was sort of the genesis of energy efficiency and the growth of this industry from really before the Northwest Power Act on, and all the things he said were spot on. It's also certainly one of the tools that we have to combat climate change in thinking about lowering carbon emissions. And I think those are two really good drivers for the energy efficiency industry and energy efficiency work in our region. But I want to put a third leg under that stool. And that is energy efficiency is actually a means of growing the economy in our region. Energy efficiency, when it's done consistently over time, can animate the economy in a way that grows how we do things, the goods and services that we produce in this state, in a way that benefits everybody. Because when the economy gets larger, when our GDP goes up, that means we're doing more economic activity. More economic activity means we need more workers. And so there are opportunities from energy efficiency, not only in the energy efficiency field, but because if we do it right and we do it well and we do it persistently, then we'll grow the economy because we become more competitive, we become more productive vis-a-vis our neighbors, and that means everybody does better. So there's a third good reason to think about energy efficiency, not only as a utility resource and as an environmental resource, but also as an animator for the economy for general economic growth.
Thank you, Stan. Very, very great reminder of all the benefits of energy efficiency. And for our communities, populations that we want to and will need to depend on going forward with demographic changes in our state. We are really needing to have everybody, all hands on deck, to support the work that we're doing. And, you know, I mentioned ARA, not because I think badly of all those investments, but it was kind of a wild time. It was a wild time in part because we saw the construction industry tank, and that's one of the biggest drivers in Washington State. Now the construction industry is booming. I mean, it's like, it's going crazy. I think it was Matt or somebody mentioned earlier about all the cranes that you see if you go to Bellevue. That's not a overestimation. They're everywhere. There's a lot of activity going on. And I guess what I'm wondering, just as a general question for the panel, what effect has this boom had on the energy efficiency work that we are talking about here today? Has it been a good thing? Has it detracted from that focus? What do you think? Lori?
Well, we don't have any shortage of work, and I would say that the boom in the construction has meant a boom equally so in energy efficiency. And, you know, there's challenges with that. We've talked about getting qualified workers to do the work, so, you know, some jobs are better than others. Staff in my group, our role is to support customers, to enable them to install energy efficiency, to help them make decisions and to incentivize that. You know, oftentimes the customer is going faster than we are because there's pieces that we have to put into place in order to make sure that we're going to be auditable by the state auditor when we have to report savings to I-937. So there's those pieces. I think there's a lot of options for customers out there with the amount of activity that's going on. There's certainly a lot of opportunity that exists. And I would say that one of the things that we do see a little bit more of now is a lot of organizations that have their own staff are actually doing a lot of the work themselves. So, you know, because perhaps the qualified subcontractors aren't there, there's property management groups that are doing installations on their own.
Stan, what are you hearing from your members on this surge in construction and impacts?
It has an effect, I think, to the extent that, of course, energy efficiency is complex. Energy efficiency is not one thing, and so sometimes what I wish more of it would resemble a construction job. Sometimes it doesn't resemble a construction job. It's more sort of light bulbs in, light bulbs out, or appliances in, appliances out. Those are less certainly dramatically affected by this issue. But folks who are doing more dramatic renovations, I'll use the Pacific Tower as an example. They're operating in this same market where they're trying to find glazers and they're trying to find electricians and plumbers and so forth, and it's you know, it's more difficult because things are really busy. I'm not going to surprise anybody in this room by saying construction is cyclical, and it's up and it will be down. Barring some massive change in the way construction cycles go. Things go up and things go down in the construction industry. That's the nature of the economy. Energy efficiency doesn't have to be cyclical like that. You know, we got a big job ahead of us if, in fact, we're going to transform the built environment from the way it currently operates and how it uses energy to meet the demands that other folks on this panel have already alluded to. And so that's a piece of work that can be certainly foundational and is going to take a lot of time, which I think bodes well in relationship to thinking about the application of skilled trades to doing things like taking 20th century buildings and making them 21st century performers.
I'll just share a little observation from our Renew program on affordable housing. We're currently out to bid on 5 buildings, and I think we're finding more problems, more challenges finding mechanical plumbing contractors, for example, because they're generally do all kinds of work, new buildings as well as just replacement as well as efficiency. They don't identify, most of them don't identify specifically with efficiency. So they're getting back to us and saying, you know, we can bid on it in 2 months, or we're too busy, or it's not attractive enough. We're having a little less challenge on electrical and lighting because there are lighting companies that identify themselves as energy efficiency lighting companies. It's their sole business. It's a little more constant. It's doing well, but it's not booming like the general construction industry. So they have dedicated workforce to that. I think they're probably competing with the general construction boom for that workforce. But I think we're seeing differences in different areas. But it's a challenge when we go out and promote efficiency projects and then have trouble finding contractors or the workforce, not because there isn't a workforce, but it's busy doing other things. That's a challenge.
All right, so I'm going to ask one more question, and then one of you lucky people get a chance. So we'll go back and forth on this. So write down your question. So here's my question. Large public investments have been made in growing energy efficiency for various reasons. What has been the impact on the industry, and especially on jobs? Are we getting what we expected? Stan, I know you have an opinion on this.
Yes, I get paid to say yes. We get that and more. I think energy efficiency has sort of proven itself. There's no doubt these are great investments, and some of the things that Lori alluded to earlier, we've gone from an era where load growth was relatively expected across utilities. In the past 10 years, just assuming even 2 or 3% load growth was pretty much every power planter's expectation. Utility load growth was going to go, and we would use more electricity as the economy grew. They were linked together, and that link has been broken, and we have flat in some utilities areas declining load growth. And while not all of that may be attributable to energy efficiency, some of it, maybe a large part of it, is attributable to the fact that we're actually can produce more goods and services now with less embodied energy in the process. And so have our investments paid off? Yes, they have. Or have we done everything that we need to do? No, we haven't.
I would just add to that I think through the large projects and public investments, as Stan said, we've proven energy efficiency works. We've proven it can be pretty predictable. We can train a workforce and so on. I think what we have to remember is that those large public investments look different than the private sector in some important ways. That public buildings are owned for long periods of time. That owners, Seattle plans to own its city hall for 25 years. As does Bellevue, Tacoma, and so on, or schools. And that there's a large scale there also, that cities have dozens and hundreds of buildings often, universities have lots of buildings, school districts have lots of buildings. So the scale and the interest in efficiency becomes pretty clear. I think taking what we've learned there in terms of the technical skills, in terms of workforce development, and translating to the private sector is what we still are a little bit challenged to do, is how do you get an owner to invest in a building when they may only hold it for 3 years, and they're not going to hold it for 25 years. It changes the paradigm. So I think it's taking all that great investment, which created a real foundation for energy efficiency, and make sure we can translate it into the broader market for efficiency.
Lori, anything to add?
Yeah, I think Stan and Steve make some good points, and really two things come to my mind with that question. One is technology, and the other is people. We've invested a lot of money over many, many years in our technologies, and in the energy efficiency world, we're going back into buildings sometimes the third and fourth time to bring in new generations of technology in the same areas. That technology just continues to change, and we all know that change is a very fast pace now. So I foresee that we're going to be continuing to make these investments. That's not going to go away. But the piece that is really important, and I think it relates a lot to what we've all talked about today, it's the people part of it that is what really sustains those energy savings. You can put millions of dollars in a building, but if you don't have it operated appropriately, you're not realizing your investment. And so the trained workforce, we can't say enough about it. The training is changing. The things that I worked with custodians on when I worked at the Kent School District, those technologies are very different today than they were 15 years ago. So the answer may be yes and no, but it really depends on how we're managing those buildings and maintaining them over time.
Burning question. Going once, going twice. Okay, let's talk about people. Oh wait, there's one young lady.
Allison.
Hi, I'm Allison Pugh. I'm the National Science Foundation Grant Director at South Seattle College and supporting the Sustainable Building Science Technology Bachelor of Applied Science degree that we have. And my question for the panel, first of all, thank you for being here today. It's an exciting topic, one near and dear to my heart. My question for the panel is about energy efficiency in the Seattle area. It's not a new idea. It's been around a long time. I think Seattle City Light's been doing programs for, I don't know, Lori, how many years?
The longest continuing running energy efficiency program in the nation since 1977.
Many years, many years.
Yeah.
And yet still we have our building stock is still relatively wasteful on the whole. And so I'm wondering about that and the kind of the discrepancy there. And I'm also thinking related to that about all those cranes in the air right now and what they're building, because we're building our future right now. And what does that look like? And are we going to be sitting here 50 years from now, you know, looking at more wasteful building stock? How does it look like? Can any of you speak to that, please?
Those are loaded questions. You know, in the energy efficiency industry, it's not uncommon for us to go into a building 3 years after it was built and start replacing equipment. Now, the reality is the codes, I think, are actually pretty good. And in the city of Seattle, we've already talked about the stringent codes that we have and the fact that we are pushing the envelope. But buildings that are being constructed today were designed 3 years ago. And so that's a constant leading edge there that you know, if technology is changing that fast and we're building that fast, you know, there's things that go into a design for 2009 code that may be out of date, or there may be potential for upgrading by the time you get it actually constructed.
Yeah, I would just add, what concerns me is some of the existing buildings. Most of the buildings are going to be around in 20 or 30 years already built. And I think we want to be sure that as those buildings are updated, not if there's a complete remodel, code kicks in and we're good, but if they're doing incremental improvements, are they building to the efficiency levels we want the building to be in 30, 40 years, or are they building to an efficiency level that is today or even 5 years ago? So I think that's a challenge as well, is to figure out how to make sure they take the big leap and not just replace an incandescent bulb with a CFL today when there's a better technology already available, and we're not going there. Or better yet, with an occupancy sensor on that LED.
Yeah, Allison pushed one of my buttons with this question, so grab the mic with both hands. It's a great observation, and I think if you look at the reports that the Seattle Office of Sustainability and Environment does for their benchmarking program, which looks at about almost 4,000 buildings, all the non-residential and multifamily buildings over 20,000 square feet in the city of Seattle, they're getting reporting data. What's the actual EUI? What is the energy intensity of these buildings? And I think when I look at it, what you see is sort of the best of worlds and the worst of worlds. Seattle City Light's done a great job, and they have incredibly high-performing buildings. And you look at it and you see a lot of buildings that are performing on a comparative basis to their peers, as well as any buildings in the country. But what you see then after that is a distribution of performance, which means that we've got laggards and middling buildings as well. And I think it's an artifact, a bit of the way we've approached energy efficiency. And I'll say the royal we, not only Seattle City Light, but all the people who have been part of this community, and thinking about oftentimes making energy efficiency work in buildings as almost a parts replacement program, where we develop a particular kind of widget and we go out and we try to get that widget installed in some buildings. Technology may change and we try to do a different widget. So we've had less of a global whole buildings kind of all-in approach. And I think that's something that Seattle City Light is actually trying to tackle right now, thinking about how do we actually look across the distribution of performance and think about bringing all of those buildings that maybe, even though those programs have been offered for 40 years, haven't been taking advantage of it for a number of reasons that Steve talks about. If Seattle City Light and We in Common can be successful in relationship, that's the bounty of job creating opportunities, because that's where you're going to go in, you're going to really be thinking about reforming the way this building is using energy. We're going to deal with the envelope, we're going to deal with the HVAC system, we're going to deal with we're going to deal with the control system, we're going to deal with lighting, so forth. Those become holistic projects which have a significant labor component associated with them. And that's what we want, because those sorts of investments over time are what's going to really put a lot of need in relationship to bringing a skilled workforce into the fray.
Thank you. Great question. One more question down here, and then we'll keep it moving.
Hi, I'm Bruce Carter with Tacoma Power, and I would like to actually address the issue in terms of building obsolete buildings, if you will. If anyone has ever gone through the code-making process, it's a real sausage-making kind of process. And codes basically are very economic. And so even though you have a new quote-unquote energy code, it is only what is basically cost-effective to the state, to the citizens of the state of Washington at that point. That's really why the job of the utilities at that point in time, to step forward to the architects, to the engineers during their design phase to try and offer incentives to them for newer, more advanced, more energy-saving technologies so that they can integrate that and overcome some of that cost-effectiveness burden, if you will, so that they can integrate that into their plans so that that gets built into that design and built into that building, which is above what the energy code, the minimum energy code, is requiring. Will you ever get to the point where it's meeting the energy needs of the building 30 years from now? Probably not, simply for the fact that the utilities also have cost-effective limits as well. And consequently, they're not going to offer incentives on energy-saving devices or technologies that are not cost-effective for them. So.
Responses from the panel?
I think you've hit my button now around cost effectiveness. So, I think you're right on about that. Both we have changing targets and we're looking at currently cost effective. I think the question I've been thinking a lot about is tackling climate change cost effective. So cost effective is an economic question today with today's technology. To achieve our goals, the City of Seattle has a climate action plan goal. It calls for reducing energy use, if you average it out, 45% in 85% of the buildings. Okay, and if you look today and ask, are all those projects cost effective by the way we measure it? Probably not. So, but who pays for that? Can we make it cost effective for the building owner? Do we as a governmental units, as citizens, need to invest in efficiency to make it more cost effective? I think those are the questions we need to wrestle with if we're going to get to those goals. And if we only go, as Stan said, halfway of where we need to be, because that's all that's cost effective today, it's going to be more expensive to do it again later or every 3 years. So I think those are things we need to wrestle with, and we need. I think the utilities have done a fabulous job, but their job isn't meeting our climate action goals. Their job is, and that's not the way they're regulated today, or that's not their mission. So we need to rethink some of those things, I think, if we're really going to go deep and go as broad as we need to be.
So a couple things. First of all, Bruce, thanks for stating the obvious that I probably should have said, is that, of course, as part of our energy efficiency acquisition, we do incentivize customers to go more efficient than code, which is getting more and more difficult. That's a kind of a diminishing return. And Steve points out that as a municipal electric utility, we work within the confines of regulation. Fuel switching, for example, is something we have not been enabled to do, but yet it aligns very clearly with the goals of the city. Stan talked a little bit about that barrier to doing a complete retrofit on a building, and some of the mechanisms that we're looking at, and we're talking a lot about how do you overcome the cost-effective barrier, how do you overcome the financing, how do you get the customers to make these huge investments like the Pacific Tower, which was a very, very substantial alteration of a historical building nonetheless. So some of the strategies that we're looking at, and this is something that we've been piloting in a number of different pathways, is a pay-for-performance model. We actually have a pay-for-performance component to our code, or excuse me, a targeted performance component of our code, which allows a major alteration or a new building to get an EUI target. 45, that's your number, you got to hit it, and you can basically do what you need to do to hit it, but you have to hit it, and if you don't, I think there's some penalties, and that's something we're working through. I think we have like 3 buildings that have chosen that pathway, and so it's still kind of, we're forging that future. On the existing building side, we're looking at incentivizing that kind of concept where the customer can perhaps get a target and implement whatever they choose to implement to get that target, and we'll pay them for the savings. Another concept is for the deep retrofits where a customer has a project and they think they can hit 20% energy savings. We'll give them a price, and they'll have several years to hit that, and we'll pay them for that performance for those over, for the acquisition of that energy savings over time for a defined period of time. So there's some creative thinking that has some barriers, which is that legal limitation that I think we're finding some ways to crack that nut.
And an interesting add-on to that is, we're big supporters of the pay-per-performance model because I think it opens up a lot more opportunities for creativity. To do that, City Light feels, or tells me, they feel that contractors need to be qualified to do it. They're projecting energy savings. They're implementing not only capital changes. It's easy to track a widget and how much it saves. It's harder to track performance and operational changes and so on. So they're going to have a qualified contractor pool, and we're in discussion about using that qualified contractor pool to also implement workforce standards. So how do we be sure that the workforce is qualified, the workforce is paid well, workforce is diverse, reflects the community, and so on. So that's another little wrinkle, I think, that connects back to especially the kind of things we're concerned about here in terms of workforce.
And that's a great transition, because in the time we have left, I want to be sure we talk about the workforce component of energy efficiency and all that we're talking about here. In terms of the talent pool for this industry, what do you think are currently or will be the biggest challenges for energy efficiency going forward, and why do you think that? 1 or 2 things that you think are just really challenges we got to tackle.
Why me?
You didn't say anything last time.
Yeah. I think like all industries, we're subject to the sort of graying workforce phenomena, and I do think there's a lot of sort of, you can tell the Seattle City Light statistic, Lori, you probably know it, but Lori's going to be the only person left over there in about 2 weeks, because everybody else is eligible for retirement. So I think across the board, I mentioned earlier operations and maintenance through our building operator certification program. We've seen a lot of survey data about how sort of dire that situation is in relationship to folks that are sort of near-term retirement. So we do have a relatively rapid transition that's going to be happening in a lot of different areas that's going to put a lot of challenges on folks that are training and preparing folks for careers in this industry. and we're likely not investing enough in the folks. Should be music to your all's ears, but we're not investing enough in the folks who are responsible for doing that, given the depth of the challenge we have. I'll definitely point that one out.
One of the things we're starting to explore specifically is around building operations, and questions we're asking is it well defined enough, or do we know what to call it? Is the career path clear enough? Has it been developed like the construction career path? Are the certifications and trainings clear? And we think that to recruit to it, to get people excited about it, to have it identified as a career, it needs to be well understood. You need to understand what you need to do to get into it, where you go for that training, what the career paths and opportunities are going to be. So I think defining it. When CLC Life sponsored a study to look at the state of the current workforce in energy efficiency, and we went through through L&I's list of different careers and job classifications, and I think we had 20 or 30 different job classifications that could fit into what we call energy efficiency or building operations, and makes it really hard to target target recruitment, to target training, to target all kinds of things. So I think that's one big opportunity that we have and challenge ahead.
Lori, any thoughts on that question?
I think in regards to the field of building operations and engineering, it's one of those jobs where it's so variable because every building is very different. You really have to be a jack of all trades, and Steve and I were talking about this. How do you train for that? I mean, there's fundamental things that you can train for, but there's 12 different major manufacturers of a DDC system. So you can't possibly know or be trained on all of those. You can be trained on some of the fundamentals, but ultimately identifying those fundamental skills and then building the curriculum and having a collaborative conversation about that, I think is what's needed. But certainly, getting back to the question, which is challenges, I truly believe that the biggest challenge is the people and getting the operators into the buildings to sustain the technologies.
And just to connect it back to the earlier session, I think diversity is not just a challenge, but it's the big opportunity. I mean, that's where the workforce is. I think greater than 50% of students in high schools in King County are students of color. So we have to get really good at providing opportunities, making sure that the workplace is safe for them and is welcoming to all kinds of different people and women and people of color, because that's what the workforce is going to look like in 20 years. Period. It's going to look like that. So how do we make sure that it does that, and it does it smoothly and as efficiently and in as good a way as we can?
Burning question, Todd Courier.
Yeah, so I just want to follow up on Alan's question, but specifically for Stan. You've got a lot of members who shop for labor in this market. Are there specific labor needs right now or in the next couple of years that your members are talking with you about, being worried that they won't be able to fill?
We did some survey work a while ago on this. I don't think it's necessarily changed all that much. A lot of our folks are of course, at the first order of business trying to think about the sort of engineering and design aspects. I mean, you have to identify what the opportunities are in a building before you get to the actual implementation of some sort of retrofit project. And I think there's a general feeling that we're not doing a very good job of getting people sort of basic energy and buildings related skills, and that's particularly true certainly in mechanical engineering focus. None of our four-year institutions in the region that are offering mechanical engineering degrees focus hardly at all on HVAC systems, although I'm sure Washington State University would likely be an exception to that, of course. But I think that's a significant concern because they end up recruiting people, and there's a lot of sort of on-the-job work, and it's a year down the road before they feel like there's productivity out of that employee in order to happen. So I think that that's one that they feel relatively acutely about. I think interestingly, the other area that I think is really important is communications. And the ability for people to be able to talk across organizations and with customers and talk in sort of an interdisciplinary fashion is also something that they find challenging. We're not seeing that level of skill development coming out of any of our training programs, sort of up and down all kinds of different job classifications. Communications is really key, and there's not a lot of attention paid to it.
That's a good point. And another skill set that I see is just problem solving. You know, you can understand the technology, but you have to understand how it all relates to each other. You know, a good example in the building is in the built environment is looking at a DDC interface and seeing one command or one status on a screen and being able to look at the set points and know that that screen is wrong. Because the set points, you understand the set points, and that's that critical thinking that you have to have in that environment.
So one of the things we often hear as educators is whether you're K-12 or post-secondary, 2-year college, 4-year university, that many times we hear from employers that they're not getting the people with the right kind of skill sets that we need. And we try to have those conversations. We try to stay current. And that education needs to step up to support industry's workforce needs even better than they already do. But let me flip that. In what ways do employers need to do a better job of either communicating their expectations or supporting the education and training infrastructure for this industry? What are your impressions of that?
I'll take a stab at that a little bit. I think one of the challenges is to create as steady or predictable a demand as we can. I think ARA had this huge spike in demand for workforce. Lots of folks out here geared up programs, and then the demand fell off when the funding fell off. And I think as those of us who are working to promote energy efficiency are out there, we need to make it as steady and predictable as possible, and then communicate what it will be, and not oversell it, or undersell it. I think sometimes it's oversold. We're doing such an amazing job. Look at these 3 projects we did, and energy efficiency is booming. It's steady, it's great work, but we need to be really candid of how it's growing, how fast it's growing, and what the workforce needs are, so that you all can react to it and have a workforce prepared for it.
Well, I think we've talked about supply and demand and understanding that and planning for that. I think the being clear about the specific skill sets that we need or certifications that are needed, being collaborative in our nature and working together to find opportunities for the apprenticeships, the internships, the ability to the opportunity to get people in the buildings with their hands on the equipment, because I think most employers want a shovel-ready person. They want them to be able to come in and be somewhat productive, and that to me is the best way to do it, is to have those the core training, but also really have the internship. When I was with the school system years ago, I was able to call up Ameriprise and have people come out and audit all 40-some schools in my district, and that was awesome. That was a workforce training program that those people were getting skills that they could then take and go and get jobs in lighting companies to do lighting audits. That was a wonderful opportunity for me trying to manage an energy program in a school system. That is the kind of thing that I think would really provide opportunities to look, and this was talked about in an earlier session, but look for those symbiotic relationships where there's a need for the work, there's a need to get the on-the-ground skill sets, and you can marry the two.
Great advice. All right, burning question in the audience. Yes, sir.
Usually, the rural areas have single-story connected party wall structures that have an 800 square foot retail shop next to a 2,500 square foot retail shop, and usually they're out of the market. They can't attain energy efficiency because their project isn't big enough. Have you heard of any communities that are doing like block grants to do an energy code upgrade for an entire block in a historic older district, tying in with DAP, Department of Archaeology, Historic Preservation? Like you said, collaborative, working together organizations. I know DAP has a worksheet where they ask for specific skills, trying to draw in historic preservation trades. Many of your assets in Seattle are not just the newer, but the older. I mean, some of the buildings are 100 years old. How do we help those 100-year-old buildings, the building owners, fill those spaces, or at least bring those spaces up to a habitable, affordable space that the retailers can put money in their pocket, the building owners can get their properties upgraded, and kind of share it with code enforcement? Because code is kind of evolving faster than these historic buildings. And usually what happens, a new tenant comes in, they get all the code upgrades. They were trying to start a business. It makes it really hard for them. So another bridge for job training and skills development is energy efficiency for historic buildings and code compliance upgrades to help the building owner and the potential business owner. Thanks.
Any reaction to that, panelists?
I don't have an answer. I have a resource, though. The 2030 district has someone who specializes in small buildings and small business, and John Watson is his name, but they've received some DOE grants to focus on that, and those small buildings would, and a lot of them are historic, would be more similar to what you might find, I think, in smaller communities. It's a big challenge. Like, as I said earlier, I think scale makes energy efficiency much, much, much easier, but they might be of assistance and share their experiences.
Other questions? Okay, for our last question, because I do want to get us to the wine, or whatever it is, or what was the beverage of choice? Oh yes. We don't want to waste time. Awesome. So as a kind of a last question for the panelists, what policies or actions do you think government in general need to consider that you think would help ensure the vitality of this sector going forward? You've already revealed some ideas, some considerations, but are there others that you haven't mentioned yet that you think really deserve careful consideration?
I'll take this on. So I've given this a lot of thought, and I hinted on it earlier, but I'll be a little more clear now. Essentially, believe that we can create great models for energy efficiency. We can make them cost effective, if you will. But at some point, we're going to need to ensure that all our buildings are upgraded. And we're supporting a model that's kind of like CAFE standards for buildings, where over time we have progressively increasing standards for buildings that buildings may reach by implementing certain measures, but more importantly by reaching certain efficiency goals. Aligning it in Seattle with the benchmarking standards where we have a lot of measurement tools already. But we think that'll do two things. It'll take the laggards, those folks who aren't investing in their buildings in any way, efficiency or otherwise, and get them on board. And we think it also sets long-term expectations. So if a building owner is investing in measures today, that they know where they're going to need to be in 2020, 2025, 2030, because some of the equipment they invest in today is going to be around in 2030. So they can have an assurance that they're going to hit a goal. Stan mentioned this benchmarking standard, this benchmarking work in Seattle and the reports they've done. We calculate that 25% of the buildings in Seattle already meet a standard that we need to hit our net zero goal in Seattle. And that if we can bring the other 75% of the buildings to that level, we would get there. And so we don't think that's unrealistic. but we think there needs to be potentially government intervention to motivate building owners to get there. And we have model, we require building owners to comply with ADA. We require them to comply with health and safety and other codes. And efficiency is requiring them to do something that will actually have a return. So that's where I would go with my ideal world for government intervention.
Lawyer Stan, anything to add?
Well, I'll just say real quickly, we've talked about the city of Seattle. Sorry, did I cut you off, Stan? No. Benchmarking codes. We have the Seattle Energy Efficiency Code. We have the State Energy Efficiency Code. We have the benchmarking ordinance and the disclosure ordinance, and we've recently passed a tune-up ordinance, which will require buildings to do periodic tune-ups or commissionings, and we have these aggressive goals. We lead by example, but from a utility perspective, we incentivize our customers, we educate our customers, and there needs to be this balance between the codes and the education so that they're complementary. That's the utility point perspective, but my personal perspective is that we can do a whole lot more with honey than we can with vinegar, and I think there's a lot to be said in human nature and behavior, and I really love the concept of challenging people to make a pledge to save energy, and social media, social marketing, mass crowd intervention. I said to my team the other day, one of the things I'd love to do in the next year is to just have everybody at City Light put on a shirt and go out into the city and say, I'd like to talk to you about your energy consumption. How can I help you? What questions do you have for me today? And to be able to have something in their hand that they could pull that up and have that discussion, I think that will have the biggest impact. That's my personal opinion. Not City Light's, personal.
I want one of those T-shirts. This is my current sort of closing in my stump speech these days. I'll try it out. I think we have to have a vision. We had a vision one time in this region. In the 1930s, we built an incredible hydroelectric system for absolutely no load. We didn't have any load out here. Why did we build all those dams? In fact, if we operated that vision under the current rules of engagement, we would have built one little teeny tiny dam on the Columbia River and declared any other investment to not be in the best interest of the ratepayer. But we didn't do that. We built an incredible hydroelectric system, and out of that we created the Northwest economy. We had an aluminum system, we got an aerospace manufacturing system, we got irrigated agriculture, thank God we have wine now. We created the economy of the Northwest because we had a vision for an energy system. We need the 21st century analog to that. And we think that energy efficiency is the opportunity to make a deep investment in how we're using energy in our buildings, thinking about enveloping that with our transportation system so we decarbonize our transportation system, and take all of the money that we currently spend in this region on waste heat, which is what energy inefficiency is, and in fact invest that in goods and services and in productive aspects of the economy to grow jobs and opportunity. So we need policies like this. We need a vision. We need a vision in order to be able to get those policies to happen. We did it once before in the Northwest, and I truly believe that we can do it again.
Thank you, Stan. I think that's an excellent place to stop. Please join me in thanking our panelists.